On Daily Debrief, we have tried to cover the disastrous impact of the Israeli war on various sections of Gaza's population. One of the most horrific effects of the war is the suffering endured by children. Since October 7th, at least 12,300 children have been killed. But the suffering does not end there. Shooting by Israeli soldiers, bombs, malnutrition, all of them are taking a horrible toll on the children of Gaza. The impact of this will be felt for decades. We go to Anna for more details. Anna, thank you so much for joining us. So the situation, we have talked about various aspects of the health situation in Gaza over the past many months. Today we're talking about the situation of children who are bearing the brunt of the attacks. The death toll, of course, horrific, but also many long-term aspects of this impact. So maybe could you first take us through the direct results of the attack itself before we go into some of the longer term aspects?
Of course, since the very beginning, one of the points that has been made in this regard is that the Israeli attacks on Gaza are causing most harm to specific populations, including children, including women, including families and people who are expected children, essentially. Now, what we have seen when it comes to children is that not only have over 12,000, at least 12,300 have already been killed, likely more if we take into consideration that many are still left under the rubble. But we also know that children have been more exposed to the diseases that have come out of the attacks. So this includes, of course, physical trauma, because as many have pointed out already, children are more vulnerable to some of the injuries that are very, very common these days in Gaza. Their bodies are less strong, so of course it's easier to hurt them. Some of the injuries that might be something that adults would survive, for children, these are deadly injuries. So of course this has been one very, very big part of the harm done to the children in the Gaza Strip. In addition to that, of course, we also know that as the WHO and as many other organizations have said before, there is a very big increase in communicable diseases, in infectious diseases, which are arising because of the bad living conditions that children are put into right now. So, we're talking about over 100,000 cases of acute respiratory infections, over 100,000 cases of acute diarrhea, and only in age groups under 5. So this is an extreme surge if we consider the numbers that were there in Gaza before. So it's just something that is also very probably underrated, because we also know that, of course, public health services in Gaza are currently not able. They do not have the resources to track the spread very specifically, and they're essentially many more children are probably in need of health care, and who cannot be identified and who cannot be reached. One last thing maybe on this is that, of course, the malnutrition is having a dire impact on children as well. We have already talked here about how pregnant women and breastfeeding women are having extreme difficulties initiating breastfeeding and feeding their children. And of course, this is also something that's being felt by children themselves. And it's not, the thought of having children going hungry is terrible on its own. But of course, if we add to that malnutrition comes with additional health risk on its own, it becomes just much worse. So those children who are hungry today, they're not just hungry, they're also exposed to an increased risk of contracting diseases. And those diseases that could be just lived through by children in other countries who are now who are living in different conditions, those diseases might leave a very permanent track on their health.
Right, Anna, that's the second question really in terms of the long-term impact. There are, of course, questions of mental health, but also the hunger, the kind of situation they're going through, definitely going to have a long-term impact on the children there as well.
Yes, and I think that there's different aspects to that, as you've said. One of them, of course, is the fact that the attacks on health that these children are living through are going to track their physical health for a very long time. That's the case when we talk about malnutrition, but it's also the case if we look at physical attacks and targeting of the Palestinian population by the Israeli forces. So over the past weeks and months, actually, since the very beginning, some of the organizations tracking attacks on healthcare in Gaza, including health workers from Palestine, have warned that children have also been exposed to practices such as kneecapping, and we know that this is something that Israeli soldiers do. They shoot you in the knee. It's a very debilitating injury. In the case of children, and health professionals have warned about this, is that you're not just simply hurting someone, you're not causing an injury that's going to go away and that could be easily rehabilitated. You're causing an injury that's going to mark someone for life. So these children are, it's basically impossible that they will recuperate in order to lead a life that they would have otherwise have led. And on top of that, you are also very, very intentionally causing additional pressure on the health system. So this is, of course, something that's part of the broadest part and dimension of the attacks on healthcare in Palestine.
Thank you so much, Anna, for that update. In our next segment, we examine the continuing regional implications of Israel's genocidal war. Ansar Allah, known as the Houthis, has declared that Yemen's armed forces will expand their attacks on Israel-bound ships to the Indian Ocean. Earlier, their operations were restricted to the Red Sea. Meanwhile, Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, delivered a speech on Friday about Israel's attacks. We go to Abdul for details on these developments. Abdul, thank you so much for joining us. So, two developments this week as far as the regional dimension of this conflict is concerned. On the one hand, we have Ansar Allah, which has said that it is kind of escalating the scope of its attacks, definitely going to cover the Indian Ocean as well. Could you tell us a bit about this? What is the context of this announcement?
Well, Prashant, as we already know, that Yemeni Ansar Allah group has been basically carrying out attack against all the ships which are headed to Israel ever since the war began in Gaza. Of course, they have declared that these attacks are in solidarity with the Palestinians who are basically facing a genocidal war from Israel, and until the war ends, they will not end their strikes on the ships which are crossing through Red Sea or Bab al-Mandab to Israel. Later on, they added the ships, warships primarily, which belong to the US and the United Kingdom, because as we all know, both these countries have carried out repeatedly attacks inside Yemen against Ansar Allah group or against the Yemeni people. And hence, Ansar Allah announced as a retaliation attacks against all their warships in the last few months. On Thursday, Ansar Allah chief Abdul Malik al-Houthi basically announced an extension of its what he called the operation against the Israeli ships from Red Sea to the entire Indian Ocean. That would basically mean that all the ships which basically were earlier taking Red Sea were diverted towards Cape of Good Hope through the African coast and taking the Mediterranean to reach Israel, now will be under attack. So even if they are taking the longer route, all the ships going to Israel are not safe. That's what al-Houthis' announcement would mean. It basically implies that Israel's attempt to basically avoid the attacks on its ships, even if it meant longer route, even if it meant more expenses, is no longer feasible as per Ansar Allah's new announcement. So that is one. Of course, that would mean that the US alliance, basically, which was created allegedly against the Ansar Allah's attempts to prevent the navigation in the open sea, would need to be reframed, and or it would mean that the US will basically have to kind of cover much wider area in order to safeguard the Israeli interest. It would also mean that the international shipping companies, which basically were using the longer route, expensive route, will have to reconsider their links with Israel. And there is an objective behind it, of course, to create pressure, because so far it has been more than 4 months since Yemenis have taken basically carried out attack against Israeli ships in the Red Sea, but Israel has not felt pressurized yet enough to kind of stop its war against Palestinians. That would mean that there is an attempt to create further pressure on Israelis. Of course, we do not know whether this will exactly work the way the Ansar Allah group has intended it to work, but that is obviously their intention. One more thing, of course, there are questions about the capabilities, whether Ansar Allah group has the capacity to launch, because Red Sea is still geographically not very distant from the Yemeni coast, and it is much easier to kind of launch attacks in that region. But Cape of Good Hope or the entire Indian Ocean is quite a big space geographically, quite a large space, and so far Ansar Allah has not shown such capacity. Of course, in last few weeks they had claimed to test hypersonic missiles, but we do not know yet whether those missiles are capable enough of carrying out attacks to such large, such long distances. But nevertheless, that's what Ansar Allah intends to do. Of course, this will create more pressure on Israelis and the allies, Israeli allies like US, and hopefully it will create pressure enough on them so that they can reconsider their war in Palestine.
Right, Abdul, the other aspect has been the speech of Hassan Nasrallah this week. So could you take us through what he said as well as what is happening on the Lebanon front, so to speak?
Well, Prashant, Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah was primarily referring to Hamas's ceasefire negotiations with Israel, which was going on for a very long time. It was stalled primarily because Israel refused to agree with the conditions put forward by Hamas. Nasrallah was primarily referring to those conditions, saying that the conditions made by Hamas are the conditions which are supported by most of the regional resistance forces, including Hezbollah, Ansar Allah from Yemen, and resistance forces from Iraq. And those conditions that Israel should withdraw completely, Israel ground forces should withdraw completely from Gaza, which they entered post-October 7 attacks, and there should be a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. These are the conditions which are supported by all the resistance forces, and that was a central point which Nasrallah was making in his speech. But apart from that, he was also referring to the optics which US has been carrying out for the last few days at least, of airdropping aid, and saying that there will be a temporary port open in Gaza to deliver a greater amount of humanitarian aid into the region. Of course, Nasrallah was very critical to both these moves, primarily saying that this is insulting to the Palestinian people, because US has not only failed to put pressure on Israel to stop the war, which would not have created this humanitarian situation at the first place, but it has also prevented all the international steps to kind of bring ceasefire or in the region. It has repeatedly vetoed several resolutions in the United Nations Security Council. And Nasrallah was saying that how, in fact, US has been providing more weapons to Israel to carry out genocide of Palestinians in Gaza. So at the time when you are providing weapons to kill Palestinians, you are kind of preventing countries to pressurize Israel to stop the war. At the same time, you are saying that you are also concerned about the humanitarian situation inside Gaza, about the Palestinians, is basically nothing less than hypocrisy, and that basically he was very critical about in his speech. As far as of course, he is also talking about how attacks against Israel will continue until the war in Gaza stops, and how most of the objectives which Israel had since the beginning of the war are not achieved yet and will never be achieved. In fact, he also claimed that Israeli forces are tired after 5 months of war, and there is no hope that they will kind of have any success in their mission inside Gaza, apart from killing innocent Palestinian civilians. So that was the gist of his speech, the latest speech. This was, again, as I said before, this is several times since the beginning of the war, Nasrallah has talked about the war in public speeches. As far as the condition in Lebanon is concerned, of course, we know that ever since Hezbollah has been carrying out attacks against Israel, Israel has also carried out attack against Lebanese, killing more than 270 people. Out of these, majority of them, of course, are civilians. A large number of them are Hezbollah fighters as well. It has also caused large-scale destruction and created some kind of political, you can say, disagreement with the Hezbollah's method. But when we see the people in Lebanon, they have been strongly standing behind Hezbollah's move. In fact, the surveys show that the support for Hezbollah's attacks inside Israel has grown in last few months, and that basically confirms the claims made by Nasrallah that the Lebanese people, knowing that they have to suffer because of their solidarity with Palestinians, they are not shying away from standing in solidarity with the Palestinians. They will continue to do so even if they have to sacrifice their lives, sacrifice their property. And also Nasrallah was referring to that more sacrifices would mean that there will be greater solidarity in support of Palestinians and against imperialist and colonial projects in the region.
Thank you so much, Abdul, for those updates. That's all we have in this episode. We'll be back with a fresh daily debrief tomorrow. Meanwhile, do visit our website, peoplesdispatch.org. Follow us on all the social media platforms. And if you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button.